Hello and welcome to another episode of Boat in the Bonnet. My name is Frans and I'm building an Iain Oughtred Guillemot traditional dinghy. In this episode I'll show you how the garboards were constructed and put in place. To determine the dimensions and form of the garboards, I made a template of cheap plywood. I fastened it to the transom, station molds and stem so it would lay fair. The outer shape of the garboard I marked using pointed slats hot glued to the plywood. The station molds position also were marked on the plywood. Having done so, the template was carefully removed. Outside the garage, I measured length and width of the future garboard and made a sketch how to divide the oak may marine grade plywood to turn it in planks with the right dimensions. Outside I noticed I was being watched by a caterpillar. So I laid out the plywood not to hurt it and cut the plywood sheet in half. Then I noticed the caterpillar had come to life, seeking a quieter place. Sorry, no pelter in its forward. I went on cutting the plywood sheet in smaller ones. Back in the garage, I clamped 4 sheets together to bevel them, becoming parts of 2 scarf joints. A setup was created, protected by plastic covering to glue the scarf joints. First a layer of unthickened epoxy was applied, followed by a layer of thickened epoxy. Then the sheets were clamped in place and put under pressure. The following day the concrete blocks and clamps were removed. The template then was placed on top of one of the boards and the marked info was transferred to the marine plywood. Small nails were hammered into position at the transferred markings. The battens needed were taken from the molds and clamped against the nails so fair lines could be drawn on the board. The nails were removed and the first garboard was cut out on the bandsaw and some cleaning up was done next. The garboard was clamped in place, looking after not to distort it. Having checked the fairness of the board, small adjustments were made. Again, the board was offered up, clamped against the stem, keelson and transom for a final check. Pleased with the result, the board was unclamped and used for drawing a copy of it on the second board. The station mold's position also were copied and marked between the lines, not to be lost after cutting the board at the bandsaw. The keelson extrusion over the transom could then be removed. The first garboard was clamped in place again and the keelson side was marked on the inside of the board. On the outside, the positions of the gripfast bronze nails were marked and then pre-drilled using a 1.5mm round drill. Masking tape was attached to prevent the board from being glued to the station molds and to make cleanup the epoxy easier. A layer of unthickened epoxy was applied on all surfaces to be glued. Followed by a layer of thickened epoxy on parts of the stem, keelson and transom. The garboard was placed in the right position and locally clamped. The pre-drilled holes guided the gripfast bronze nails and thus the garboard into position against the transom, keelson and stem. A clamp at the front of the garboard counted the tension on the nails so they would not be torn out before the epoxy had cured. A small sledgehammer served as a dolly to hammer the nails onto their final depth. One day later, all clamps were removed from the first garboard, the one at starboard side. The garboard at port side could not be clamped with any of the clamp types that were available to me, so I made a lever construction at each station mold, keeping the board in place. At the transom and stem, the board was clamped the same way as at the starboard side. Then I measured the positions of the bronze nails and copied them onto the second garboard. The keelson side was then marked on the inside of the board, and once again the 1.5 mm round drill was used to pre-drill the holes for the bronze nails. Like on the starboard side, masking tape was attached and a layer of unthickened epoxy applied to all surfaces to be glued. Also, thickened epoxy was applied on parts of the transom, keelson and stem. Then the board was turned over and nailed in place using the small sledgehammer as dolly. At the stem, the tension in the board was countered by clamping it. After letting the epoxy cure for 1 day, all clamps were removed. The garboards were done. That's it for this episode. In the next, the planking of the hull will go on. Hope you liked this episode. Thank you for watching and see you next time.